Welcome everybody. The objective of today's this short lecture is to familiarize you with the concept of structuralism as we use it or employ it in literary and critical theory, and to trace its origin, its evolution, and later assimilation into different branches of knowledge or fields of knowledge and inquiry. And in the process, towards the end, I will be analyzing the basic premises of structuralism, the basic theoretical postulates, and will conclude with a critical assessment of structuralism as an intellectual movement. So let's begin this talk with the question, what is structuralism after all? Structuralism was an intellectual movement, essentially European in spirit and nature, that flourished in 1950s and found its fruition in the works of a series of scholars belonging to different disciplines. Say, for example, the work of cultural anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, cultural critic and French semiotician Roland Barthes, philosophers like Louis Althusser and Michel Foucault, also literary critics like Vladimir Propp, A.J. Grimas, then Yuri Lotman, René, and also psychoanalysts like Jacques Lacan, and linguists like Roman Jakobson, or probably you can include Noam Chomsky and a few others, J.L. Austin, speech-act theory. These are the different, disciplines connected with structuralism when we look upon it as an intellectual movement that flourished in the 1950s. We have to bear in mind the fact that structuralism exerted tremendous impact upon different fields of knowledge or disciplines, including anthropology, philosophy, psychology, history, and literary studies. It emerged, in fact, in Europe it emerged as a powerful critique of new criticism, the kind of existentialism propounded by Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, and even Marxism. It actually marks the end of the era of liberal humanism, which has assigned centrality to the human being or man as such. Now let's discuss what does structuralism attempt to analyze. Structuralism attempts to analyze social and cultural phenomena in terms of Saussurean linguistics. This is the first aspect. It also attempts to draw an analogy between language system and other social or cultural system for that matter. And it has its basic assumption. It can be put in a very simple sentence like this. Structuralism is based on the assumption that things can never be studied in isolation. Things can be studied only with reference to the larger context or the larger structures of which the things are a part of. So essentially, it presupposes the existence of larger structures within which smaller entities can be discussed and analyzed. Now let's go back to the origin of structuralism. When I made the opening statement that it flourished in Europe during the 1950s, there will be a little, room for confusion. When we trace the origin of structuralism, we will have to go back some 5 decades back to the first decade of the 20th century. It is basically a movement that originated in linguistics, especially in the works of the French-speaking Swiss linguist named Ferdinand de Saussure. And we all know that Saussure made a series of lectures to his students or disciples at the University of Geneva between 1906 and 1911. And these lectures were compiled by two of his colleagues and later published after his death, after the death of Ferdinand de Saussure, posthumously. It was published as a general course in linguistics in 1916. The general course in linguistics could be thought of as a great historical moment as far as the field of linguistics is concerned, because it marks the emergence of what is today known as the linguistic turn. Saussure firmly believed that anything and everything could be analyzed and interpreted in terms of the language system. That is the kind of primacy or privileging he has done to language. And that is why this has come to be known in literary history, in literary studies, as the linguistic turn, named by none other than Richard Rorty. Actually, the publication of the general course in linguistics marks a radical, revolutionary movement as far as literary studies, particularly linguistics, is concerned. In other words, it could be described as a Copernican revolution that dismissed the Cartesian philosophy of cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Man is a rational animal with faculty of reason to perceive things, using our sensory perceptions. This was the Cartesian, or Descartes, the 16th century philosopher, propounded the idea that we human beings have this faculty of reason which can be used to perceive the world. But Saussure puts it in a different way, and he asks the question, how do we as humans perceive the world in which we are living? How do we understand the world we are living in? And he says that we understand or perceive the world not through our senses, only through language. In other words, experiences of human life are mediated only through language. This is the kind of primacy that he has assigned to the role played by language. Everything is determined by language. So Saussure famously makes a statement: without language, our thought is a vague, uncharted nebula. Our thought process is very unclear and amorphous without the aid and assistance of language. So without language, our thought becomes something that is vague, something like an uncharted nebula. And therefore, he proposes to study language scientifically. He proposes to inaugurate or start with a new branch of science named semiology, which he defines as the science of science, the science of science. Basically, when he proposes the introduction of a new science called semiology, of which linguistics will be a part, according to Saussure, he is actually making a critique of the then prevalent school of thought named philology, particularly dominant in the field of linguistics. What is philology? We all know. Philology is the study of the origin and evolution of any language over a long period of time. And it often makes comparison with other languages. Philology is closely connected with another notion or concept called the correspondence theory. Philology firmly believed in the correspondence theory, which implies that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the sign and its referent in the object world. The sign and its referent in the object world. For example, if I say the word tree, that's a sign. But there is a tree out there. That is the referent. So there is a close correspondence between the sign and its reference according to the correspondence theory connected with the study of philology. But Saussure says that this kind of a diachronic study, diachronic in the sense, covering a long period of time, of language, how language originated, how it evolved, what all changes came into it, this kind of an approach is unacceptable as far as Saussure as a linguist is concerned. Instead, he recommends a synchronic approach to the study of language. What is synchronic? It is just the opposite of diachronic. Instead of studying a language over a long period of time, the synchronic approach puts emphasis on studying a language at a particular point of time. Say, for example, English during the Middle English period, or English during the Shakespeare's days. This is a synchronic study. So Saussure prefers a synchronic study of language instead of a diachronic study of language. To Saussure, language, like any other system, has a structure, or in other words, language is a structure of science. And he divides language into two constitutive elements. They are called langue and parole, respectively. What is langue? What is the distinction between langue and parole? Langue refers to the underlying rules, conventions, grammar, syntax, semantics or meanings. All these governing rules and conventions are referred to by the term langue. That is fundamental to any language. If you want to study any language, we should have a grasp on the langue of that language. On the other hand, we have parole. Parole refers to individual utterances. Say, for example, words spoken by human beings in our conversation, in our interactions. All these words or signs could be referred to as paroles. So first, he draws a distinction between the langue and the parole. According to Saussure, the basic unit of any language is a sign. Sign. A sign is made up of two inseparable components. They cannot be separated. They are made up of two inseparable components, namely the signifier and the signified. What is the signifier? Say, for example, the signifier is the word or the sound image or the acoustic image. When I utter the word tree, the acoustic image or the sound image, that is called the signifier. At the same time, when I utter the word, rather than, uttering the word, if I go for writing or expressing it in the written form, there is a graphic image. So in short, we can say that the signifier stands for the sound image or the graphic image of a particular sign. Then what is the signified? The signified is the concept of a tree. Or when I say tree, it invariably creates within our minds a concept about the tree. That concept is referred to as the signified. The sign is described by Saussure as a two-sided psychological entity. The two sides are the signifier and the signified, which stand inseparable as far as the sign is concerned. And famously, Saussure remarks in his course in general linguistics, a sign unites not a thing and a name, as the correspondence theory presupposed. A sign does not simply unite a name and a thing, but a concept and sound image. Signified and the signifier. The signified and the signifier. According to Saussure, language operates as an intersection of two poles. One is horizontal, the other is vertical. So any language, take any language for that matter, doesn't make any difference between languages. We can find that any language, in order to operate, it always takes two axes or two poles. The horizontal axis is named syntagmatic axis, whereas the vertical one is referred to as the paradigmatic axis. So basically there is an interplay between the two axes of the poles, namely the paradigmatic vertical axis and the syntagmatic horizontal axis. The horizontal axis could be thought of as an axis of association or combination, better say contiguity, whereas the vertical axis, that is the paradigmatic axis, could be thought of as an axis of selection and substitution, because there are several words having the same meaning. Say for example, the boy passed the exam. Instead of the boy, you could use the girl passed the exam. So boy and girls are words that could be substituted, or we can make a choice from the words boy or girl. That is why this pole has been described as the pole of substitution or selection, in fact. Whereas the other one, the syntagmatic axis, the horizontal one, is made up of different syntagms, where the meaning of a particular word will depend on the word preceding and the word succeeding after it. So the position of the word on a particular syntagm will determine its final meaning. That is, the quality of the syntagmatic axis. Now let's see the three important theoretical postulates of Saussurian linguistics. According to Saussure, the first theoretical postulate is that meanings in language are arbitrary in nature. What does it mean? Meanings are arbitrary. It means that there is no one-to-one correspondence between the signifier and the signified. When I say tree, it doesn't invariably refer to a tree. Or, whatever connection we can draw between a tree, the spoken word tree, and an actual tree there in the object world, it's all, through conventions that we derive the meanings, or we arrive at the meanings only through a process of conventions. Secondly, the second postulate is that meanings are based on social and cultural conventions. There are certain social and cultural conventions which the members of a particular community, they share between themselves. Only the members of a particular culture will be able to use language among themselves. So, for example, we Malayalis use the word maram for tree, and maram will not be understood by a man from any other language. Say, a Portuguese guy won't be able to understand maram as a word that stands for tree. Only people who share certain common cultural background will be able to understand maram in that particular sense, or tree in that particular sense. Therefore, meanings are always fixed, and they are created through, or they are the products of social and cultural conventions. The third and the final postulate of Saussurian linguistics is that meanings are generated through differences. That's very funny. That's, the most important contribution of Ferdinand de Saussure. Meanings are generated through differences. We know Terry Eagleton, the great literary critic, has made this idea, or elucidated this idea in very clear terms, saying that a cat is a cat not because it's a cat, but because it's not a bat or a rat. A cat is a cat not because it's a cat, but because it's not a rat or a bat. So what is the process that is taking place essentially? We are making differences A cat is differentiated from a bat. A cat is again differentiated from a mat or a rat or whatever be that. So only through this process of differentiation that we arrive at meanings. This is the most important postulate of Ferdinand de Saussure towards his linguistics. In other words, he states there are no positive terms in language. There are only differences. There are no positive terms in language. There are only differences. In other words, we could say that the meaning of a particular word will be determined by its position with reference to the whole system called language. So the meaning of a word will depend on its position in relation to the whole system of language. Therefore, Saussure says that the function of a linguist is not to focus his attention on individual words or utterances like parole. Rather, the function of a linguist is to highlight the significance of the langue or the underlying governing rules of any particular language. By 1960s, we could say that the heyday of structuralism has almost come to an end. Particularly by the turn of the 1970s, structuralism came under heavy criticism. It came under heavy fire. There are many criticisms leveled against structuralism. Number one is its emphasis, overemphasis upon science and scientific rigor. Saussure exactly wanted to build a new science called semiology. And this excessive spirit of scientism has been attacked by critics. Another important limitation of structuralism is its ahistorical approach. Ahistorical in the sense it lacks any historical perspective, or it has a total disregard to history. And also it has been criticized with its overemphasis upon scientific rigor and accuracy. It has created a kind of meta language, means language beyond language. These are the main criticisms or limitations of structuralism, which eventually led to its being critiqued by the post-structuralists by the turn or by the end of the 1960s. Also, Saussure had emphasized the primacy of speech over writing, because in all his lectures he privileged speech over writing, saying that speech is characterized by presence, whereas writing is characterized by absence. What does it mean? When I speak to you, my word as well as me, the speaker, is present. There is presence in speech, and therefore he has assigned primacy to the speech. Whereas Saussure says that in writing, there is absence of the writer as well as the referent that has been written. So both the things are missing, both the things are absent. This kind of a privileging of speech over writing has come to be known as phonocentrism, closely connected with Saussurean linguistics. To sum up, we could say that structuralism had to have a serious setback by the turn of the 1970s, primarily because of its overemphasis upon scientism, and also the tall claim made by Saussure that anything, any system, cultural phenomena or social phenomena could be described through language. So there are two instances of overemphasis. One is the overemphasis of language, another is overemphasis on scientism or scientific spirit. Thank you very much.